Señoras y señores, no hay duda de que las personas somos seres influenciables.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's no doubt that as human beings we're influential beings. And we see this from a very young age. For example, we want to play video games because our older siblings do so. We also ask our parents to buy us the sweatshirt that all our friends are using at school. We could consider this behavior as something normal because we learn by imitation. We are social beings, after all, and we're enriched by every interaction in our environment. However, there are situations where our desire or our ability to be influenceable can really work against us, and there are people who take advantage of that in order to benefit themselves. So, in what situations are we more influenceable? We are more easily influenced when we are vulnerable. For example, adolescence, a period in our lives that we undergo profound changes, and quite possibly we don't get along that well with our parents, so we try to create a distance, or even in some situations end up leaving the home. Another example is when there's a case of illness, when a remedy or some form of hope is required in order to be able to keep going. Why am I sharing all this with you? Because I want to expand on coercive groups. Coercive groups are groups that manipulate people for their own benefit. These are groups that limit and harm the freedom of individuals. In all likelihood, this isn't an accurate definition per se, but that's not a coincidence because it's actually quite challenging to describe clearly what a coercive group actually is, especially where there are barriers between organized groups. Something that could severely limit personal freedom because of abusive practices. So, by definition, to live within a society actually limits or curtails the freedom of citizens. So we're not actually free to go to the bakery, get bread, and leave without paying, right? Or go to see a doctor without being a doctor without going through university first. Nor can we move indefinitely to another country without going through the necessary steps. However, these rules are necessary to live in harmony, and they go along with respecting the rights of others. It's simply a matter of abiding some basic rules of coexistence and civility. Now, when it comes to coercive groups, they have certain characteristics, and it's interesting to be able to see them and identify them in order to avoid them and falling into their traps. Firstly, let me give you a few characteristics found in papers on cults published by the European Parliament in 1995. These groups would attempt to threaten people physically or their liberty. For example, racist or xenophobic groups. Another example, they could actually abduct or kidnap, even kill somebody. I imagine that you'll remember the case of the apocalyptic case that predicted the end of the world and instigated a mass suicide, right? Like Georgetown. Also, there are other famous examples of groups of followers, be it men or women, even children. Often, sometimes they're sexually abused, these people, by their superiors even, depending on the hierarchy of the group. There are also possibly groups that commit fraud scams or blackmail the people who follow them. It happens to be that in the case of the groups that threaten members, that threaten people who threaten to leave the group, they try to isolate them from their family in order for them to be dissuaded and stay within the group and not leave. On the other hand, there are other characteristics that these groups use in order to manipulate their subjects. Firstly, we have isolation. So they, as I mentioned, they separate or isolate the individual from the group so that they're easier to manipulate. First, they start by isolating and separating them from their friends and family. However, in some cases, they force the individual to quit their job or perhaps even leave their home. The group might even exert certain controls over the information that reaches these individuals. They generally, for example, ridicule contrary opinions against the group, anything that comes from the exterior, anything critical. Finally, they demand submission to the group. And they do this through emotional manipulation. At the beginning, the individual is bombarded by acceptance and love, but they wait. They wait to receive in return from that individual a commitment. And it goes from being love and adulation to becoming coercion of that person. Finally, I'd like to mention certain types of coercive groups. Many of these groups are religious groups, and perhaps those are the most well-known ones, actually. That being said, they're not always religious. They could be New Age spiritual individuals who ascribe to pseudoscience and alternative therapies that are not backed by any sort of scientific fact or study. Lastly, I'd like to mention the most novel or the newest one of these groups. It's a growing group of coercive commercial groups. These groups often attract young people, even minors. They offer fast money, easy money, and the possibility to have financial freedom. However, they're not anything more than a pyramid scam that depends on bringing more and more people, members onto the group, into the pyramid. So it's possible that these coercive groups are a product of capitalism where spiritualism is lost and traded in for the gift of money. To conclude, let me repeat. What are coercive groups? Organizations that manipulate individuals, threatening their lives and freedom through unethical actions such as blackmail and fraud, and end up canceling their identity and subjecting them to the group. I hope these 4 key parameters will help you spot manipulation and potential victims of these networks. Thank you very much.